Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Alexis, a blind author, content creator, and freelancer, and today I'm reviewing The Rebel's Redemption, and that is all I'm going to say about myself due to the subject matter of this video. I genuinely do not feel comfortable making my usual introductions because of how much this video deals with sexual assault. That is your first content warning. I do give other content warnings throughout the video. Please listen to them. Please make sure that you take care of yourselves. Your mental health matters. And if you need to skip this long form video, don't worry. Come back next week where I will be reviewing The 2 Leaders by Overlord, which is volume 8. And that's going to be more fun. So if you need to skip this video, please do so. And come for a more fun video. I'm not even giving you personal or writing updates because I just feel that I cannot do that. Though I feel like personal updates might add some levity to the review before you show up. So I just want to address a couple of things before we start. One, anything I say here, especially regarding the sexual assault and stuff related in this book, are based on my reading of the book and anything I might have learned through reading or any research I did probably previous hand, but mostly on my reading because that's just my interpretation of the book, as is every review in this channel. And 2, there is one thing I did not address at the end of this video that I think is worth addressing considering what I am going to be talking this romance. And it is this. Okay, look. This review is long enough, but look, I love the romance genre. I do. And one of the more interesting things that comes up in the romance genre is discourse, whether romance should have a happily ever after or not, or whether it needs it or not, because it is convention. The 2 conventions in romance, these are 2 big conventions in romance, are happy for now or happily ever after and the meet cute. The meet cute is, where everybody kind of meets, like the love interests meet. And then the happy for now or happily ever after is how they're supposed to end. Romance, generally speaking, is supposed to be a more hopeful genre. You're supposed to, the characters are supposed to end up happy. And love conquers all kind of stuff, right? And that's fine, generally speaking. However, there is always discourse about how if romance should or should not have a happily ever after. And when I read romances like this, I understand the camp of people that say romance doesn't need a happily ever after. I understand. And and I can agree with those people when I read romances like this. See, the problem, I love the romance genre a lot, like I said. But I will say that I do think it can be said that genre specifically, not romance, but just genre specifically, is one of the things that can... okay, how about this? Let me try to say it this way. People a lot of the time talk about the tropification of fiction, right? People talk about how that they don't like the fact that like the books are being like, oh, it's an enemies to lovers romance or blah blah. The basically tropes are being the books are being essentially pushed into these tropes. Like when you talk about the books, you just kind of use the tropes. They're just talked about in these tropes. However, to some degree, the genre is the same thing. The thing with genre is that it's a bit different because tropes are generally like story aspects or like story frameworks, while genre can be restricting. And one of the things that is restricting about the romance genre sometimes, I have felt it before, even as a romance reader, is the conventions, specifically the happily ever after and the happy for now convention. While I may respect the conventions, I do think that there is such a thing as too much, and that there are romances that, genuinely speaking, can go and instead of just saying it's a love story, just call it something in the romance genre that explores the idea of it not being a happily ever after. I think there are certain books that aren't necessarily romance, or at least if we were to go by the general conventions of romance, that would that have been categorized as romance but don't have a happily ever after. I think it's a good thing when genres and conventions change. And I would like to see more room for people who think that they can write romance, but maybe not end happily. I think that's why romantic tragedies exist and things like that. But I can understand why certain people will argue that romance doesn't need a happily ever after. When certain romances are, I think I start looking at it and go, I can see it. You can follow all the romance beats and have a romance, or at least a relationship of a romance, but you don't always have to end up with that person. And that kind of reality that's what's always in the romance. Instead, the romance often will have someone like this male character, this male love interest, be with a female love interest, and have all these red flags in them, and somehow they end up together. Now, I also mentioned the idea that there are certain things, I guess, that I like, I think, in a fantasy romance or in romantasy that show up in a contemporary romance. But I did not mention necessarily why I prefer the stuff in a fantasy romance as much. So the thing with a fantasy romance, when I like certain things in a fantasy romance that I don't like in contemporary romance, the biggest thing is the genre. Okay, it's fantasy. The thing with a fantasy and in contemporary is that contemporary equals real life, while fantasy is everything but real life. It's a fantasy. The reason people, for example, this is a great, I guess, an interesting a comparison. Like, the reason I like Nyctos, who was willing to murder people for Sarah, but I would not like reading that in my contemporary, is because Nyctos is the primal of death. But if a man did that in real life, if he was a real life person, I would run away, because I know that I would be in danger at some point too. But the reason I would like someone in a fantasy is because it's a fantasy. Nyctos is basically the primal of death. So when read in a fantasy setting, romance is a fantasy, yes, but when read in like a fantasy setting, an actual fantasy setting, the feelings are slightly different for me. I can kind of separate it, because there's a difference between our real life and fiction to me. That's how I usually read my fiction. However, in contemporary, it's close to real life. It's very modern. It's in our modern era, in our modern settings. This is not Elysium or I don't know, or Prithian. This is somewhere in I think it's Charleston, North Carolina. The book takes place in somewhere in North Carolina. This is somewhere in the U.S. where I live and can happen to someone. So it's really hard to read a romance like this and not look at the people that are like, romance doesn't need a happily ever after, and say, actually, yes, it does, because I read books like this sometimes. So that's kind of like one of the things I didn't address, but thought I would, because I think it's important to, separate the differences and how I feel about them. But anyway, this review is long enough. Enjoy it. Again, please listen to the content warnings that I give throughout the video, and listen to what you need. Listen at your own comfort level. If you need to skip this week, completely understandable. Don't worry. Next week, I'm coming with something more fun. I will be reviewing the 8th volume in the Overlord series. It's been a while since I've done it, so I'm happy I'm back to it. But I'll be reviewing the 8th volume in the Overlord series, which is a good, it's honestly a good palate cleanser for the next, for just for this, and it might be for the week after. Can't quite remember. If you need to skip, I understand. Anyway, if I don't see you in this video, I'll see you next week. But if I do, thank you so much for watching, and yeah, I'll see you on the other side because this video is really long.
So, the best part about reading romance novels is that you can usually find other romance novels, at least particularly in the contemporary romances I've read. You can find teasers for other romance novels, and a lot of those might be written in a particular series, which then leads you to even more romance novels. So I found these romance novels through a when I was reading the series Billionaires of Boston by Naima Simone, which I have reviewed. I'll link the playlist below. I actually really enjoyed reading those books. Now I had issues with the some of those books, particularly The Perfect Fake Date, more than every other book. God damn, that one annoyed me. That one irritated me. But I still was invested in the characters, so I read it. So I decided, that sounds interesting, I'll give it a shot. And because I will say that the nature of a lot of these contemporary romances that I read, the best part about this is that although these are in a series, you are able to read them like standalones and separately. So if you skip books, there's like really little you'll miss. Um, so I'm gonna talk about that because I am actually skipping one of the books in this series, and we'll talk about that later and why. But that is like the best part of this. So if you choose not to read any of these books or most of these books, you're gonna be just fine. But this one was interesting because I had two different reactions, and we're gonna talk about this in general. I mainly found this interesting because I got to read more romance, and because honestly, romance novels are usually easy to get through, especially when you're kind of in a reading slump, which I am. Like I'm in a bit of a reading slump. I'm also 10 books behind schedule, but I'm really in a reading slump, and romance is easy to read and easy to get through. I have a bunch of audiobooks I want to get through, but right now I'm kind of just reading romance here and there in my writing craft book because those are like the books I've been kind of in the mood to read. And as a mood reader, it's not good to force myself to read because I'm probably gonna get myself into a bigger reading slump. But as I'm recording, I am in a bit of a reading slump, and romances are easy to get through. So yeah, I just so why not, you know? But let's talk about this one because if anything, it's gonna be, I think, it's going to show a couple of interesting things. Also, before we read this, before you read the romance, I do want to issue a content warning. It does come up in the book, and it is one of sexual assault toward the main character, and it's not explicit in the book, but it is talked about, and I will touch on it in the video. And I will try to do my best to warn you when I do so. That way you can like skip a little bit or something. But I will touch on it in my interpretation of the way this was written in the book. And yeah. Anywho, let's talk about the synopsis. Here's the synopsis for this book. This bad billionaire is back, and he's here to make good. She owes him a second chance. He's ready to collect. Anderson Stone would do anything to protect Piper Blackburn, including going to prison and cutting her out of his life for her own good. But when he sees the vulnerable beauty again 10 years later, he still wants her, and she's still keeping secrets. She once trusted him with her life, and it cost them their past. How much will they risk for their future? It really doesn't tell you much about the book, but other content warnings. Now that I'm remembering all my content warnings, and we're gonna touch on these things too. So there is a sexual assault thing. There is also there is breaking in, attempted kidnapping. There is there is one for disrespecting boundaries. There's a lot here. I think those are like the main ones. Those are the main ones: attempted kidnapping, sexual assault, breaking in, and boundary violation, if you will. So keep that in mind, because I I felt uncomfortable in chances. Not enough to stop reading. It wasn't like a guilty love reaction. It was just a reaction I'm pretty sure the author didn't want me to have. Like, I'm pretty sure she didn't want me to have that that the author didn't want me to have that reaction. But I did, because it was terrible. Oh wait, there's even, at least I consider this, so I'm gonna put it as a content warning. I think there's infantilization in this book. Like, this book feels infantilizing in areas. So I wanna keep that there. That'll be a thing. So the prose is good. The prose is really easy, really accessible to read. Like, that is like the main reason I kept reading, because I assure you, as interesting as the plot was and all that stuff, most of it, I didn't read most of this for the plot. The plot was just secondary. The prose was good though. The pacing, I'm glad to say, was a very slow pacing. I found the pacing to be good in general, right? But I want to talk about the romance, because this is kind of what helped the romance. So the pacing was a bit slower. It took some time for the story to get into what it was, into what it was supposed to be for the romance. It took some time. It took its time to get there, but it was kind of an interesting pacing for it, because it was fine. So the romance technically was really believable between the two characters, because it is a friends to lovers romance. It's usually really there's an established relationship that makes sense for a friends to lovers romance. I have written a friends to lovers romance. As of recording, I am editing said romance. I'm hoping to I don't know if I'll have it released by the time this video is out, but you'll know based on the description and stuff, right? But basically, there is an established relationship that makes sense for friends to lovers to romance. However, friends to lovers as a trope, as great as it is, because there's no such thing as a really bad trope, the only bad part is execution, is ruined by miscommunication. Again, miscommunication trope is not bad. I don't hate it. I don't dislike it. I can see where miscommunication would lie, and in all the fun stuff. I like miscommunication because I think it can explore a lot of things, but the way it's usually written, it's just so very, very much annoying, because at the end of the day, all you have is a how do I call it? You have like all you have is like a bunch of miscommunication leading the entire story. And what happens with miscommunication trope is that it becomes a very plot convenient way to keep the characters apart, and even force them together at times, but mainly keep them apart. And this book is dripping with miscommunication. And it goes further than just miscommunication. It goes to an extent where I don't feel, as I read, I don't feel, now I don't judge author's intentions, because I don't care about author's intent very often, but I want to mention it here. I don't think the author's intent here, based on the note that they left in the beginning, was to make this romance really problematic. But there are areas of this romance that feel problematic. And it could be me, but I feel red flags in this romance. Like, alarm bells were ringing throughout throughout my this book. Like, alarm bells were ringing real loud here in my head, because some of that stuff felt very problematic, and I don't think there was in intent in making it problematic. I think there was definitely some I think something happened. I don't know, but I don't think there was intent to make it this problematic. Again, I will say my usual caveat: I enjoy problematic fiction here and there. There's no problem with enjoying it. I just like to point it out when it is problematic. I don't think there's anything wrong with liking problematic fiction. I'm not saying you shouldn't like it, and I'm not saying you shouldn't read it. I like to point it out. I usually point it out for other readers. And also because I think while we can enjoy problematic fiction, I do think it's important to point out the problems. So, where where is this, where are the problems here, right? Okay. This miscommunication goes as far as one character, Stone, making decisions for Piper without asking. And he comes off as someone who thinks like they know better than the other person. Now, if maybe it would have been written in a way where it's like, I'm trying to help, but she's too stubborn. I can't make a decision for her, however. She's very stubborn, but I'm still trying to help her. But I'm not going to make decisions for her. You know, that kind of thing, where the guy is respectful. I could have been on board with it. It can be argued that maybe because of the way he came out of prison or whatever, he's just doing stuff because he did all this stuff and now other things are happening. But I'm not taking that argument, because they grew up together and he is just getting involved where nobody asked him to get involved. And literally one of his friends is just like, listen, she doesn't want you involved. Like, why do you keep doing this? Like, no one's asked you to do this. And does he listen? No. But does his friend kind of enable this? Yes, everybody seems to. Even she, to a point, but she also gets kind of slightly infantilized and in this book, and it feels like she is infantilized by trigger warning here, because I'm going to talk about it a little bit, the assault. It feels like she is infantilized, especially because of that. I am going to be reading a line later. I'm going to be talking about two different lines in the romance book, because I want to touch on these two lines. Not both of them have to do with assault, by the way, just one. But basically, she feels infantilized in areas here, and I get annoyed, because it's written as though Stone knows better than her about her life, and he now just takes over her life and makes decisions for her without consulting her, and just says, and eventually she agrees with him here and there's like, I hate when you write, or whatever. It's like, and things like that, and she just does sometimes what he says, sometimes she does the opposite, and it blows up in her face, but she doesn't get to fix that. Stone does. And I know that is a thing, that is a fantasy, here and there. That, like, I know that's a fantasy, that in romance you have, someone fixing things for you, and that's fine. I think it's okay. I'm not someone who fully enjoys this, and I find that the way that it was written, it was like he knew better than she did, and it is extremely annoying to read. There, for example, there's like there are, one of the things that happens is that there is an article. I'm gonna go on spoilers here, but she talks to a reporter against his wishes, because he doesn't want her to do that, and she does. Well, she doesn't explain certain things. An article hits, and Stone is able to get the story beforehand, and stuff like that. And he knocks on her door, explains what happened, and it's like, listen, like the swords gonna hit. You need to disappear for a while, right? But when he knocks on her door, she does not want to see him. She doesn't want to talk to him. So what does he do? He breaks into her house. He picks the lock and breaks into her house. And then attempts to just drag her out of the house, just attempts to kidnap her. That is what we want in a romantic partner, according to these books. Someone to attempt to kidnap her. He's like, what are you? And she's like, what are you doing? She's like, since you did not, and his words were basically along the lines of, since you did not do what I suggested, and since you are not listening to me, I decided to just skip the middleman and just take you and do what I wanted anyway. I'm sorry. For someone who seems really smart, or who supposedly is really, really smart, and according to Piper, an honorable man. Dude, no! No! You are not stable! And she even mentions it. She's a psychologist and mentions, like, he seems to have these anger issues that he seems to have developed in prison. And nothing happens with that. Nothing. And I think this is a bigger problem with category romance, and I'll talk about it, but not yet. But it's like, that is creepy. And eventually she agrees because he gives her the reasons why they should, and she ends up going to this Caribbean private island with him or whatever, and she starts to avoid him, and she's angry with him for good reason, and she does tell him, like, you don't seem to realize you hurt me and you're still doing it, and he apparently feels remorse. I don't believe that he does, but according to what's on the page, he does. And he ends up avoiding her, and she ends up avoiding him for as long as she wants, and then of course sex has to happen in that island, and whatever. Now they're stuck together and they start sleeping together or whatever. Of course it has to happen. But then, of course, we have continue to have miscommunication where he does keep making decisions, and she's like, you need to stop doing that. You need to start discussing things with me. And there's even one where she's like, okay, we talked about this, where he agreed to tell her stuff. He's like, you need to make decisions. You need to stop making decisions for me without talking to you about them. And one of the ones said where it was like they were going to his place instead of her place, and he's like, I'm sorry, I thought that it didn't occur to me that you would disagree with me. Eventually she goes along with him, but it's like so many occasions of this where miscommunication gets pushed up to him making decisions for her. And the problem with this too is that she is written as a character who is supposed to have agency, but she is continuously infantilized by Stone, and mainly by Stone. Really more by Stone than anything else. She's supposed to be written as a capable and smart woman who has agency, and she's very stubborn throughout the book and fights for what she wants, but at the end of the day she just continues to agree with him, and he keeps making decisions for her, and she's the one, and he doesn't always apologize. Like, I don't even feel like he always does a great apology in any case. Yeah. So to talk about the rest of the book, I am going to go into spoilers because I have already gone into broad spoilers, but I'm going to keep going into these spoilers, okay? So he keeps doing this, and it happens like the way that the book portrays it is that he feels guilty that he wasn't fully able to protect her. So, trigger warning for sexual assault. Touching here. So, basically, the reason Stone goes to jail is for manslaughter. And what happens is that he walks in 10 years earlier on Piper's stepbrother, who, by the way, for some reason is named Blaine. That is the weirdest name I've heard. I don't know. Sexually assaulting her. And he stabs him. And he didn't mean to kill Blaine, but he did. And he goes to jail, he pleads guilty and got a reduced sentence, and now he's out on parole basically. So that is like the reason that he went to jail. And he seems to feel, the way it's portrayed is that he feels guilty for not protecting her and so on and so forth. And the reason he cuts her out of his life is mainly because he didn't want to he didn't want her to see him like this, like the way he was in jail and stuff like that. He didn't want to see her, and he didn't want what he did to taint her and be a problem in her life. So she didn't even get to really reveal what happened. Like there was she didn't get to help him at all, and she also feels some guilt or whatever. So that's like the main crux of their problem and the main issue with their communication. Not to mention that he keeps making decisions for her. And this trauma feels like it's written as some kind of inspiration, but also like a way for him to infantilize her continuously, because he continues to just make decisions again, like I said, for her. But it feels like it is written as a way to be like, she was a weak girl before, but now she's a strong woman, and she won't allow some things to happen. And I don't like this. Listen, it is, listen, it is one on that I don't think Sarah, I will say this, I don't think Sarah J. Maas handles sexual assault in her books well, but at least when it is brought up, it isn't brought up in a way that to me feels, at least when I read it, like, yeah, she seems to be adding it for shock value and drama, but it doesn't feel like it doesn't take over the entire story. This feels like it took over her character and became too much of her identity. And I think to a point it makes sense. Like it makes sense that part of the way that it was written makes sense to according to some of the things I have read about it, and some of the way the victims might feel. But the thing that I found here is that Stone keeps using her the violation against her as a way to, and the fact that he couldn't protect her, as a way to justify his decision making. And instead of this being about her, it becomes about him. And that's what annoys me about this, that it's about him. It's not about her at all anymore. It's about him and and stuff like that. Like, I can understand the media part, but also it just feels like it's about him. Because literally when she's like, I want to tell people because I don't want them to continue thinking that you're a bad person. He's like, I need, literally, his reason for asking her not to say anything is like, he's like, I need the last 10 years I spent in prison to matter. I'm sorry. This isn't about you. It's not about you. What the fuck is wrong with you? It's not about you. It's not. It's not about you. So I don't know if this was badly handled or not, but I feel like the way it's written feels like it may have been badly handled, and I just dislike this. Now, I'm gonna read a line here to explain where how I want to illustrate this. I want to like, this is how it kind of was This is like this is how it was written. Literally, this is like in the last chapter with the black moment and stuff like that. And they had like an argument because they didn't have like an argument, but basically, the story was revealed, as to why, because as to why he killed Blaine and what happened. It was revealed, and it was revealed to the news, and he thought, because of course miscommunication had to be a thing, that she talked to a reporter against his wishes. Again, your wishes don't fucking matter. In my opinion, his wishes don't matter. I don't care enough about him to say his wishes matter. Honestly, he as a character annoyed me. So, but he leaves. He's like, because her parents are like, thank you, like Morgan specifically, the dad or stepdad was like, thank you for protecting her when I couldn't. He's like, I loved her. I would have protected her anytime. And he just leaves. And she's like, he walks away. He keeps walking away and cutting her out of her life. And she's like, I'm not going to accept that this time. And the line that comes here is, these are the lines that seem to inspire her or whatever. Before, she'd been a scared, damaged girl who hadn't known how to fight for what she wanted. Now she was a strong woman, certain about what she wanted, and determined enough to do whatever it took to get that. I don't know if that's a good thing, considering the subject matter of this book. It feels very, it feels so much like it was just added for the shock value in this book. I could be wrong, but it reads like it was added for shock value, and I don't like this. I feel this, to me, is problematic. Again, I didn't enjoy this romance so much, but this feels like it's problematic. And honestly, everything seems to be about Stone, never about Piper. It's annoying. So, yeah, as you can see, miscommunication was taken from miscommunication to outright just terror, I think. So I talked about the pacing. Again, the themes, I think the themes of Assault felt like they were just added for shock value, and there was no inspiration on it, and it just felt like it was added a lot for Stone's benefit, not for Piper's, and it just felt like it was a way to give him a reason to feel guilty for not protecting her. And I think this is a pretty big issue in general with romance in general. Like this, there are certain things that are just an issue in the romance genre, and this is a thing where whether it's single title category or it doesn't matter. I don't see it as much in the contemporary single title romances I've read, but I do know that you can find those issues in fantasy romance. And despite that, I have enjoyed a few of them that do that. I enjoy it less in contemporary, because at least, that's a thing that just, that is a thing. But I have enjoyed some of them. Some of them are less overt than what it was here. So I have enjoyed a couple of these. But that is a problem, I think, in romance in general that I have found as I've read. But the lack of exploration of any theme is a big problem in category romance specifically. So, at least in the ones I have read. So, listen. There's nothing wrong with category romance. Category romances are really easy to get through. Let me give you some pros for category romances first, because I don't hate category romances. I prefer single title if I can get them, but I will eat up category romances because they're easy to read, and also they make for really easy content on this channel. So why not do it? Here's the thing with category romances. So category romances are great in A, again, they're really easy to get through, and B, for writing. A category romance needs to have a compressed plot. And because it needs to have a compressed plot, you have a very predictable word count. They're usually, I think, 40 to 60,000 words. I think the longest it'll be is like 85,000 words, but usually between 40, and we're going to say 40 to 60,000 words is the range for a category romance. Okay? Okay. So that means that the plot needs to be a bit more compressed. Things need to happen a bit quicker. The timeline needs to be expedited in order for the story to fit that word count and fit the category romance expectations. So the big one is just like the word count, and that's like you need to be able to compress whatever plot line you have into this small word count. And this can be really good because sometimes it does force you, not even sometimes, it generally forces you to write in a compressed style, to tighten up your plot line, to make your plot more to basically it forces you to use your words wisely, in my opinion. So it can be great for writing, and because it is category romance, especially if you are a beginner in romance, as I still believe myself to be, it can be really great to identify the elements and expectations of the romance genre. And the big ones are usually they need to have a meet cute, chemistry, and tension. There, of course, needs to be the conflict, which is what will lead to tension. There needs to be a black moment, and there needs to be a resolution. And said resolution is either a happily ever after or a happy for now. Whichever you choose is up to you. I generally prefer a happy for now when reading and when writing most of the time. The negatives to category romance, though, is that there is no space for exploration of heavy themes, which is why a lot of the heavy themes come off as, at least to me, as added for no reason and shock value, so they don't get to explore. A lot of secondary subplots don't get the exploration that the main plot does. I mean, yes, subplots should drive the plot, the main plot, but they should also have their own story, and they should feel more relevant than they do in category romance. So that's like the bigger issue. I think those are that's the biggest issue that I personally have with category romance. And there is no room for that. Single title romances, at least the ones I've read, tend to let you explore more themes, and they have more stories, sometimes even more characters and stuff like that. But you don't get to do that. Sometimes in a category romance, you get really good layered characters. Other times, the characters are meant to be layered, but don't read as layered. At least not to me. So these are the things I found. So the fact that there is little exploration, and that the theme seems to be in the background, and that it's it's mainly, a lot of it is for Stone's benefit, I think is a category romance issue. I do. So that's unfortunate. If this would have been a little bit longer, if this would have been given a little bit more time, maybe it would have been better in that area. Let's talk about the characters. We're going to talk about the miscommunication trope a little bit more when we talk about the characters, but here we go. So the characters, I am annoyed by them. Mostly Stone. Piper is just too easily influenced, but also Piper is just heavily infantilized by Stone, as I mentioned. So I don't dislike her per se, but I also don't love her. She claims to, she had the opportunity to do a lot of things to get Stone away from her, and she did not. She just kept agreeing with what he wanted, and just kept almost like consenting to things that he wanted. And sometimes she did things that she wanted. Now, I will say the characters are moved around a lot by the author, so the characters do feel like they don't feel like people. They feel more like chess pieces for the author to move around. And Piper definitely felt that way, and that is annoying because these characters did have interesting backstories that could have been explored. They had an interesting personality. They had clashing personalities, which I thought would have been really fun, especially Stone and the way he kept doing things. So one of the things I talked about, there's boundary violation here. And one of the things that he does, besides, I mentioned the attempted kidnapping, but a lot of the things that he does is, one of the things he does a lot of time when she tries to leave, he blocks her. He'll like grab her wrist, pull her toward him. He'll do these things that to me are red flags. If you grab my wrist when I don't want to talk to you, no, don't do that. No, that is a red flag. It's no. So he'll do these things like that, like grab her wrist to force her to talk to him, block her path, not let her get out, I guess, until she agrees to do something. Sometimes when she says get out, he does get out, but like, breaking into the house, attempted kidnapping, grabbing her wrist, blocking her path. No. That's terrible. What are you doing? Back up. Now. This is one of the things. Like the title of this, the subtitle for this review makes sense just because when I read this romance, as I was reading this romance, I had two different reactions. Half of me was like, oh, it's so cute, friends to lovers, yay. I, in concept, love this trope. I mean, yes, I know that the miscommunication trope is gonna ruin it because authors tend to use it as some fucking plot convenient bullshit to keep the characters apart. I know, but oh my gosh, so cute, friends to lovers. The other half of me was angry and was just like, get out of my personal space now. I was like screaming every time. It was just like in my head, I'm like, get out of my personal space. No, give me space. Why are you so close to me? And I don't think that's how you want to react to a romance. Right? Like, as a romance reader, that is not how I want to react to a romance. And this is how I reacted to this romance. I felt really suffocated. As I was reading this romance, I was, hold on, you guys. Okay. Anyway, yes, half of the time, I was screaming for this person to get out of my personal space. I don't think that, at least as a romance reader, I don't want to feel like that. I read romance for hope, escapism, and I generally read for that. I guess when I'm not reading nonfiction, that's the case. But I generally read romance for the fact that I know there's guaranteed hope, there's a guaranteed happily ever after, there's a guaranteed happy for now. I don't want to feel like I'm being suffocated. Like, the reading experience felt suffocating because of this dude. It felt suffocating. I was so tired. I was so tired by the end. I was exhausted. I felt suffocated. I didn't want to be there. This guy irritated me. So I thought I would end the review with something funny for all of you because you had to suffer through me talking about how terrible this was. I thought I would end it with funny. So I've talked about, when it comes to romance, some of the weird lines, I think, that I do not like in romance, that make me want to hate this, that make me just hate describing, or that just make me want to like cringe. Now, cringy romance is not bad, by the way. Cringy romance is not bad. I personally like cringy lines in romance, depending on the situation. My sapphic romance is cringy as hell. Is cringy. Like, the flirting in my romance is cringe. I'm not going to explain the way I wrote the flirtatious dialogue here because I will probably do a a video on it where I talk about like really really fun parts of writing the romance, and I'm probably going to talk about the flirting, but it's cringy. The flirtatious dialogue is cringy as hell. My friend, I read it to my friend, and she's just like, I can't with you. That is how cringy it was. So, yeah, it was cringy as hell, right? But here's the thing, cringe is good, but then there are certain lines of prose that make me think, why? Why did you write this? What was the reason to write this? Why would you write this? Why would you hurt me like this? What was the reason to write this line? These lines. A lot of them are usually based on a lot of the lines, a lot of the terrible lines I seem to touch on are description based, the way that like I remember reading, I think it was on The Perfect Fake Date, or at least in all the books, where like the guy, in the guy's point of view, the way that they're describing a woman, and I think there's an issue in general where it's like she looks like pure sex, and I'm like, she's wearing a dress that's probably short. She's probably wearing a short, cute dress from what I'm cute describing. That may be showing off some cleavage in her legs and maybe wearing some heels. Why do you say this? So it's cringe lines like this. But I have never read a line before a sex scene that made me not want to read this sex scene. Here's this line. Here's the line. I'm not going to read the lines previous. This is in the middle of a paragraph. Here's the line. The hot cradle of her sex settled over the hard ridge of his desire for her. This is like the last line of the paragraph. I don't know about you, but I read that line and I didn't want to read anymore. I think it took me a couple of days to go back to reading this romance after reading that line. I didn't want to read anymore. That was bad. These are the kind of lines I refuse to write. Like, that was bad, okay? Was it not bad? Was it not bad? Because I feel like that was bad. That was not even cringy. That was just bad for me, in my opinion. So I thought it would end in something interesting. So overall, I had a terrible time reading this romance. I didn't enjoy it as much, but it is easy to read despite all the issues I had with it. It is easy to read. I will continue this series. However, I will be skipping book 2. So book 2 of the series has one of his friends falling in love, or going through a romance. But it turns out it's like a second chance love kind of thing. And I don't mind reading about second chance love. I mean, Black Sheep Bargain by Naima Simone is second chance love. Ooh, sorry about that. And like, what? Sorry. And reunited like lovers, and I'm okay with that. But in this one, the two love interests have a son, and honestly, I am not invested enough in the characters, and this is the reason I'm skipping this. Well, one, I don't want to read I don't usually enjoy pregnancy romances, first of all, or any romances with children. The main reason I've read 2 different pregnancy romances is because I was invested in the characters. It was Colton's Surprise Heir. I'll link it below. I'll link the review below. And Secrets of a One Night Stand. Those are the 2 main pregnancy romances I read, but I usually avoid them because I don't want to read about a couple and their pregnancy and them trying to figure it out, blah blah blah. I don't care. I don't want to. So I usually avoid them, but the only reason I read them was because I was invested in these specific characters. When it comes to Colton's Surprise Heir, I read the original short story, A Colton Encounter, which led up to the pregnancy, and then read that book because I found out there was a book for that. And with Secrets of a One Night Stand, I read Black Sheep Bargain, then went back to read the series. And as I was invested in the characters, I chose not to skip the second book. But for this one, I'm not that invested. Stone was annoying. And I'm not invested enough to be like, yeah, I'm gonna read about these reunited lovers and their son and their I don't care enough to do that. So the next romance I'll be reviewing, the next romance book I'll be reviewing will be book 3 of this series, and it is going to be The Sinner's Secret. I'm here for it. It'll be fine. These books are easy to read, and I'm like reading the first. I've already read the first chapter, and I'm a little bit in chapter 2. He may not be as problematic as Stone. Maybe. The bar is low, but maybe. I rated this romance 2 stars. Not good. Don't recommend, but I think it has an audience. It just isn't me. So, what did you think? Have you read The Rebel's Redemption by Kira Sinclair? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Based on everything I have said, based on the 2 lines that I read, one being funny, the other one being kind of oof. Would you read this romance? Would you not read it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I would love to talk, and I will see you very soon.
Okay, so I'm afraid when I said this was the end of the review, that is not the case. I have a couple of things I need to address here, and a couple of things I sort of changed my mind on, but a couple of things I really need to address here. Most of what I said in that review when I recorded it, I think all the way back in 2023, I think is when I recorded this. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I recorded this all the way back in 2023. So I believe I read this after Roe versus Wade was overturned, but that still kind of colors my reading. And a couple of other and a couple of other things have like come up for me that I think I need to address. Okay, so first of all, I want to say, let's start by saying that I think I would have been a bit more lenient on this book if this was a dark romance, because last year, while you won't see a review of the books here, I did read a series by Pepper Winters that was a dark romance. The series is called Monsters in the Dark or something along those lines. And I actually very much enjoyed this romance, though it had a lot of problematic topics, including abuse and so on, and assault, and it was actually very graphic assault. And I did enjoy reading it a lot more than I enjoyed Guilty Love, that also had an assault scene in the book. I think if someone would have told me that Guilty Love was a dark romance, I probably would have been a bit better at it too. Then again, who knows? I was entirely against dark romance at the time. However, last year I did get into it a bit more, and I would like to find the dark romance I like. And so far, Pepper Winters has done that for me. I haven't read more of their books, but I probably will. I think I would have probably been a bit more lenient, knowing that it is dark romance. Because the thing with this is that if this was portrayed as a dark romance, I think that this would have probably been slightly better, and with less of it would have actually be less terrible, because I actually have, believe it or not, pretty low expectations for dark romance, especially considering some of the dark romances that are written today that generally romanticize abuse and a couple of other things in that form. However, this was not it. So yes, I think I would have been slightly more lenient because I have low expectations of dark romance, and it would have actually been slightly better, especially with everything that has happened. I just can't. But this apparently is supposed to be a healthy and good romance. And as evidence of that, we're going to read the author's note that I did not read. Now, again, I don't usually care about author's intent, and I don't usually bring up anything related to the author in my reviews. I now do it here and there, but I don't want to make that a practice because I do not need the author to influence my reviews. We saw kind of what that looked like in Iron Widow because the book was terrible, but the acknowledgements of that and the way that I think it was talked about Not great, not great, okay? But let's read this author's note, and I'm going to give you my thoughts as I read. Forgive me, I am reading one-handed. So here's the author's note here that I was referencing when I was recording the review at the time. Here we go. Dear reader, it's no secret that I recently took a couple years away from writing. Circumstances have a way of derailing and the best laid plans. Unfortunately, that part is true. And fate often enjoys proving no one can avoid unexpected events. Also true. No one understands that better than the three heroes in my upcoming Bad Billionaires series. Okay, so this is where I realized, I guess when I read it, that, oh no, this is not supposed to be, I read this before. If I remember correctly, I probably saw this note and read it way before I started the romance. I must have been skipping through the book and found this, because I know I was reading, I think, I was probably going back and read a couple things. I must have been reading this before the romance. So when I read the romance, I can only imagine thinking, oh no, this is meant to be a healthy romance, yet we're seeing extremely toxic and unhealthy patterns. But she sees them as heroes. And if we were to make inferences here, if we were to infer anything, it suggests that she would see them as heroes, and not even like morally great characters, but like heroes who are doing the right thing in this book. Okay? That's one of the things I want to keep you in mind. All three men epitomize the idea that nothing, not even huge bank accounts, can prevent terrible things from sometimes happening. Yes, but not in the way I think that the author thought it would. I don't think that's what this produces. I mean, there was hope for the Sinner's Secret, but we'll talk about that when we get there. But and stuff like that, there was hope. And then it went to hell, especially in Big Easy Secrets. Also, we'll talk about. Anywho, working on these stories over the past year has been a gift. I absolutely fell in love with Stone, Finn, which is the guy of the second book, and Gray, the guy of the third book, which is the next one I'll be reviewing in this series. These three men definitely have a past, but with the right women by their sides, they might eventually find a future too. Okay, I want to talk about this specific part because I think this part promotes the idea that a woman could theoretically fix a man and could be the reason they could essentially have a future. I think this is terrible, especially in our current political climate, because I think when we read, we also want to take it. We don't necessarily read, in my opinion, with the intent of the book, what the book might intend. Our life experience colors the way that we read books. And books are, despite anything anyone might say, very much political. And at the moment of recording, and at the moment of that you will see this, by the time you'll see this, Donald Trump would have taken presidency. And we are currently, as of recording, still we have a Biden presidency, and we are currently by the time he'll soon be our actual president for a second term, which means that a lot of people are going to suffer. People have already been suffering in this country. This country has things like for-profit healthcare. People are already suffering in this country. Roe versus Wade was overturned in 2022, which means women in many states of this country no longer have good reproductive rights. They don't have rights to decide if a fetus stays in their body. They no longer have the right to decide whether they can get rid of essentially a parasite to some degree, because it technically eats at them because they can't actually sustain themselves. So in one way, I kind of agree. I get it, but it's a fetus. But like they can't decide that they can get rid of it. Some states don't even make exceptions for things like incest and rape. should have warned you about the sexual assault part. Sorry. So they don't even make assumptions for that. And we also the conservative politicians are full of people who believe that women shouldn't have those choices, and that people should, and that women should be. There are people in this country that are probably in the party, as my understanding is, that they might believe that women should stay at home and be essentially the caretakers, not just of their children, but essentially of their spouses. And something like this is one of the most prevalent things in a lot of the category romances that I have read. It's especially in this series. There is a book review that I have planned probably for 2026, where we have a woman doing all that, like, after reading this, just doing all this emotional labor for a man who does nothing, gives nothing. He is nothing more than an asshole, better said. He cannot, it's like he cannot do the emotional labor, but that she has to do it for him. And that is what this line portrays. And to some degree, this book has this too, because he is pushing the idea, as I discussed earlier, he's pushing the idea that he does not want her to say anything about the assault because he wants the 10 years he spent to matter. Fuck what she wants. What does that mean? What does that mean to him? Apparently nothing. So yeah, she is, in this romance, we see a woman worn down to such a degree that she just agrees with everything he says, because essentially she probably feels like she has no choice, even though the book does not say that. And in this case, this author is, in my opinion, promoting these views. If we were to infer anything by this note, which I am inferring by this note, because the book is fiction, but this note is not. This note is an author who wrote it. That is what this promotes to me in this book. If I were to have known enough about this book before I started reading, and then I would have read the note, I would have been like, okay, yeah, it's officially probably like some kind of dark romance, because that is what this looks like. If this was dark romance, I wouldn't even say you're promoting those views, because dark romance is, generally speaking, some of the dark romance out right now is a shit show, while there are others that are probably interesting. And I do not like to assume that someone is promoting views, but if I read this note, and having read that book, it is promoting that view to me personally. That is the message that is promoting. And I am not a writer who thinks you should write for a message and stuff like that. But when you are in a place, when you are reading and you're in a place where currently the political climate is essentially, in my opinion, kind of dangerous, you have to, this does come up. And that is what books like this would promote. Again, I usually prefer more single title romance. Usually the women in those romances actually have agency and don't have to necessarily do the emotional labor for the men. And if they do emotional labor for them, it usually is an exchange that they might do some emotional labor for them as well. And at this point, that's not what this romance does. Let's continue with this. Anderson Stone has always been a bit of a rebel. And from the time they were kids, Piper Blackburn's constant protector. I think that's what she wants us to. That's what the author wants us to believe. But honestly, I can't see it that way, considering what I have described in this review. He doesn't regret a single minute of the 10 years he spent in prison defending her. Maybe not, but she was left in a traumatic situation, and now he's trying to tell her what to do. That doesn't make it any better. Piper, on the other hand, couldn't be more angry with Stone. Oh, not for saving her, but for pushing her out of his life when they needed each other most. Yes, and her feelings are valid. However, this book does not do that. This book does not validate her feelings, from my memory and from everything I have described. This book does not validate her feelings. It is validating Stone while pushing her feelings away. So no, her feelings are entirely valid, that she should be mad even if he did something for her. But this book doesn't validate her feelings. This book just says, oh, you feel bad, but like, Look what he did for you. So, two things can be true at once. Once Stone is back in the family fold, it won't take long for Piper to confront him and the sparks to fly. Honestly, they shouldn't have flown. They should have just died in the water. Stone wants redemption. He doesn't deserve it. He doesn't deserve redemption. He has none. While all Piper needs is an explanation, which he should have given in the beginning. This whole thing would have literally been solved in 6 pages. However, going toe-to-toe with Stone will get her much more than she bargained for. Not interesting enough, I'll say that much. I hope you enjoy reading Stone and Piper's story as much as I enjoyed writing it. I'm glad you enjoyed writing it, but this book is bad. And it's published out there, so I can say that. Oh, hold on. I just lost my place. But what I will say is I cannot read these books the same way. It can't. You can't. I can enjoy romance, but this book is just so. It's so. It promotes everything I don't believe in. Not to mention, it's harmful. It's inoffensive in a way, but it's also somewhat harmful if you look at it. At least from my view, anyway. I don't pretend to understand all the facets of certain things. It just feels like it's harmful. Okay, I'd love to hear from you and she gives her website, KiraSinclair.com, or come chat with me on Twitter at twitter.com/Kira Sinclair. This was before Twitter was X. I guess this was published. And don't forget to check out the other Bad Billionaires books coming soon. Best wishes, Kira. Okay, so this was the note. This is the note that I was referring to, and this is why I'm very much upset with this note. I have no other words except to be annoyed by everything I have read. Not to mention the fact that this was basically hand waved and said, oh yeah, they know this and that. And it's like, wait, that's not what you're promoting? Terrible things in this book. Okay, the other things I wanted to address is that I don't want to pretend as though I understand what assault victims are going through. I'm only stating an opinion here as to how I read it, but I also know that there are stories of women who were assaulted and eventually, made it through and all that fun stuff. The reason I didn't see that here, I don't know why I didn't bring it up, but I don't want to pretend to understand that this was, that assault was I don't want to pretend that I know what assault representation would look like, because I don't. So I just wanted to kind of make sure to bring that up, because I'm no expert on this stuff. I'm only basing it on the way I read it, and I wanted to make sure that was brought up. Another thing too is that if you the other part that I generally just didn't like about this book, and somehow I didn't quite mention it regarding to the assault stuff and the subject matter of assault here, is that she refers to herself essentially as damaged in that line I read. I don't know why I didn't go deeper in that, but referring to herself as damaged just doesn't feel. I don't know. I feel it felt like it was written in a way. It didn't feel like it was written in a sensitive way. Essentially, it just didn't feel like it was dealt with the sensitivity that a subject like that deserves. And I could be wrong, but it just didn't feel that way. It didn't read like it was written with sensitivity in that book. So keep this in mind. The other things too is I probably should have addressed this better, but I was incorrect when I said that in category romance necessarily doesn't allow for these themes to be explored. What I really should have said is that a very skilled author can use limited space to explore subjects like this. A very skilled author can take a short word count and make a subject feel like it was really, really well explored. And that is not what this author did. So I just wanted to say those things. Again, all this stuff is an opinion. No expertise in the realms of assault. I just read it. I just read that it just felt insensitive, and I wanted to point it out. But if you have read it, let me know your thoughts. It just, it could be argued with the line that I read, however, that when she said, damaged, she felt that way, and now she does not, but, it almost sounds like the book makes it sound like Piper went through some recovery of sorts, especially now that she's helping other people. So theoretically she would have gone through therapy was the inference I made when I was reading this book, and it didn't read that way. So I'm slightly confused. The other part too about this book is that Piper does not have a character arc. So even if you wanted to make this about growth in any way, from my memory, we didn't get anything related to the last 10 years where she did go to, like, where if she went to therapy, for example, that it helped her, that she went through any growth whatsoever. We didn't get that. We got whatever she was now, which was barely nothing. And in that time, there was no arc for Stone, or you could argue there was, but it barely felt that way considering the way the author sort of wrote them. And there was definitely no arc for Piper. And in this series, there is an issue where the female characters don't really go through an arc. It's the male characters that sort of are like, that they're judging the male characters. They're like, oh, you're judging me. Now you have to learn that you were wrong, and that everything I do is right, while every decision you make was wrong. I fucking hate that. So yes, it's one of those things that is an issue with this series, as you will see, I think, in the other reviews I make regarding it. So keep that in mind. It's a lot. It's really a lot, and I don't know what else to say. But I hope you enjoyed this extra rant of the review. I know we've been here for a really long time, but again, I hope you enjoyed it. I'm actually kind of sorry that this was the long form review I started February off with, but I hope that either way you find something interesting about this book, about this review, not the book, this review. And would I recommend this book? No, I would not. Anywho, I don't feel comfortable with making an outro because of the subject matter of this review. So we're just going to end it here. So until next time, consume stories. Find better stories, actually. Bye!